Hello everyone. Today I want to have a conversation with you. This is outside the normal purview of the East Coast Economic Update. One of the things that I've been thinking about critically is the concept of the end of capitalism. Now, before the rest of you start posting things like, he's a socialist, I want to stop and have a conversation on an academic level. This might be actually two videos, so I'm going to kind of begin a discussion. Now, from the position that I'm trying to come from here is the understanding that the development of capitalism as we understand it, the Adam Smith school of capitalism, is only been about 252 years old. And the reason for that, just to give as a background, was due to the fact that before the time of the beginning of what we now know as the Industrial Revolution, sometime before the Renaissance, we had the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages. And there were no middle class. There was serfs, and there were nobles, knights, and all that other good jazz. And what occurred after the Black Death, after the Black Plague, that wiped out 1/3 of the population of Europe, what occurred was there was not enough nobles and other folks to hold the farmers and the serfs to the land. And what developed was a merchant class, and out of that merchant class began innovations and a ability to innovate in far as inventions and other aspects of creating wealth, because wealth no longer was a static situation between two classes, the ruling class and the serf class. So you have this middle class, this merchant class that's now starts to come up from the bottom into the middle class, or what would become the middle class later on. And what happens is that through this freedom of discussion, this letting up of static classes, the two-class system that we have prior, allows for a leisure class to be developed from a position where it was not a divine right, like divine rights of kings and so forth. So when we get to Adam Smith is already seeing the development. He's in the midst of this development and understands the concepts of corporations, the Dutch West India Company creating places where things could be grown, imperialism as we understand it in a sense, and I'm using that term not as a, not in the Karl Marx understanding, and I will get to Karl Marx in a second. But imperialism in the sense that you control the means of production. In fact, the concept of controlling the means of production is this term that is used by Adam Smith in regard to the invisible hand, as he refers to it. If you have not read Adam Smith, it's an interesting read. So the control of the means of production, as Adam Smith describes it, is the control of the mechanisms between controlling the flow of product, raw materials, to places where it can be finished and made a finished product. And that involved a lot of things. Now, I'm not going to get into the discussion about slavery and all this other stuff. That's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to understand that as we've moved from epoch to epoch, and as things developed, we reach a new point where if the prior generations of the previous epoch would look at it, would say this is fantastical, this is, and for those the eschatological Christians and others who believe, in a messianic age or whatever, those prior groups would see the present group and say, oh, that must be the messianic age. That must be the age where all things are possible and everyone is equal. And there's a reason for why I'm mentioning this, because a lot of what's being held back has to do with our fear of change. Now, capitalism works in three ways. One, you need raw material and access to that raw material cheaply. Second, you need to be able to transport those raw materials and process them relatively reasonably, price-wise. That means cheap labor, non-labor, or mechanized labor, and we'll get into mechanized labor in a minute. And then finally, the final product is shipped, stored, and sold within a period of time. And this is the methodology of capitalism. Capital flows out, monies are sent to secure these items, and then the profit thereby comes back from where it began. Now, the problem with capitalism as a whole, it only works if there is a methodology between peoples. We've gone from a situation where we have the raw material processor, whoever that is, the refinement processor, the jobber, to use a term, and then the final product to the retailer where it is sold. We have cut out the first two, and now we're cutting out the third, and all those people get paid, even if it's a small amount, and those folks are being replaced by technology. And to the point where what we've had for the last 20 years is a consumer, product retailer and consumer, and sometimes a product retailer is just a storehouse, i.e. Amazon, for example, and the processing unit cuts out all these people. And the only reason why there are people in the process in capitalism is because they're necessary. When they're no longer necessary, and mechanisms, products, cotton gin comes to mind, industrial manufacturing, and now robotics, we need less and less unskilled labor and fewer people, thereby fewer and fewer people to pay, thereby higher profits. Now, the problem with capitalism, when I describe it that way, is that you reach a point where the product no longer needs to be processed by anybody, and that the person who may or may not purchase that product no longer has the money to do so. So that creates a problem, a huge problem. Hold on for a second for the siren. So this is what happens when you make videos at the end of your workday. So, so what you have is a critical point. Now, we had a similar critical point back in 1929. The means of production became so efficient, and that people bought only so much stuff that there reached a point where the amount of products being produced and the amount of products being sold hit equilibrium, and then the amount of products being produced outstripped those people who needed them. Now, some of that was stopped or fixed by a process called planned obsolescence. It's the reason why your iPhone 2 doesn't work as well as your iPhone 8. Now, even with planned obsolescence, it does limit the amount of people and items that occur. Now, what is happening right now and what will be happening in the next 24 months is an end of the concept of capitalism by the standard of Adam Smith's understanding of capitalism. Now, what's going to replace it is not communism. Let me be clear about this, because communism, as it's known, was a counter to hyper-processed capitalism. In other words, people were working themselves to death, and their motivation was a form of slave labor. What stopped communism from spreading in Europe and the United States was the union. If it wasn't for organized unions, we would have had a huge communist revolution. And that, depending on whatever position you're on, there's issues with the concepts of communism, because there is an issue of what is called commanding heights, and I'll put a link on a discussion of what commanding heights are, so I don't lengthen this any longer than I have to. So anyway, capitalism is dying, and what is going to replace it is not communism. It's not even socialism. What is being replaced by it is a new shift, just as serfs could not imagine being merchants because they've never experienced it. The merchant class didn't exist. It came out organically in the situation in which a horrible situation happened. Now, unlike that, God forbid, that horrible situation from occurring, a third of the planet's humanity being wiped out, which is not something I'm encouraging, and nor do I think that that's going to happen. But what is going to happen is a shift, because now we're no longer creating things because we need to create them. Things like 3D printers, robotics, automation of all types will have created all those things and will be creating all those things and are creating all those things right now. We just haven't mentally reached the point of realization. When we do, what's going to happen, what's going to come out of this organically is a thought about working for the sake of the good of working. In other words, the creative end, the creative aspect of our ability to do things because we want to is what's going to organically come out of that. And we're starting to see that now with the gig economy. A lot of people are working from home, a lot of people are working different jobs, and a lot of people are working jobs, either working jobs so they can advance what they enjoy doing, or working in something that they enjoy doing in a method in which they can fix what they're doing time-wise. In other words, they have more leisure time. Now the problem is, what is going to replace that so there is an aspect in which we allow ourselves to move to that next level? Now that brings us to a discussion about universal basic income, the discussions of that, the pros and cons of it. But I'm going to do that in a different video. But in this video, I want you to understand that capitalism, as where everybody's like, oh, capitalism, it's like it came down from the mountain. We've been doing it for 1,000,000 years. We have not been doing it for 1,000,000 years. We've been doing it for 250 years. This methodology. The problem with this methodology is that it's not manpower specific. It's now robotic specific, and that shift is allowing for us to change how we see ourselves and how we operate. What does that mean? That means people who want to create and grow food from the ground by hand, and the people who want to spend the money for that, for whatever reason, that organic way, they can do that, or they don't have to. Developing software and devices because they want to do that. Collaborating with other people to create different things, whether it is clothing, whether it is home structures, whether it is organically growing food, hydroponically growing food, or even writing and discussing things. We are at a critical tipping point where this era, this epoch is beginning and the previous epoch is ending. What it's called, I have no idea, but I wouldn't call it communism, because again, communism is a counter to capitalism. Once you remove capitalism, communism doesn't operate because it doesn't have anything to fight against. Its whole raison d'etre is about how manpower operates in a corporate system. Remove the corporation and you don't have a structural system for capitalism to stand up against. And because of that automation in the 70s and 80s, when we started getting computers and stuff, aided in one way or another towards the collapse of the Soviet Union. What we have now to look forward to, or what we have now to do, is to have the automation to a point where people can live rather comfortably, more so than they have ever done in prior generations. That means that we have to rethink our understanding of borders. We have to rethink our understanding of wars, or therefore the ending or lack thereof of wars, and the focus on the individual or the community of individuals, whoever they are, in the development of things and aspects and ideas that are higher thinking. Now this might sound fantastical right now, but most importantly, it's fantastical from the perspective when we talk about serfs looking at a merchant class, saying that would never happen. We've always been on the land. We've always been serfs to the king, because that was the limitation of their minds and their understanding. But as this develops organically, and it is developing organically, we're going to have to change radically what we are doing as a society. And we have to also change how we see each other, both as an economic model and a societal model. It's changing so fast that we don't even get a chance to have that organic change. So we have to openly have that discussion. So in my next video, I will discuss the pros and cons of the universal basic income and its perspective in this new epoch. So I enjoy and look forward to your comments and discussions. Peace.